The film opens by showing James, who wants to leave his girlfriend to go to the last party of mankind before the world is completely scorched as a whole. Because 12 hours from now, the effects of an asteroid falling into the North Atlantic will flatten all of Australia. Along the way, the people James met had started to lose control of themselves. They did whatever they could for the last time on Earth, because for them, the rules are just a limit amid the despair of death, which is in a matter of hours. Not long after, James came face to face with someone who was carrying a sword. He then ran and luckily survived by hiding under the car. After the man left, James got out from under the car and intended to steal the car, but unfortunately, the door is locked. Not long after, a car came and parked in front of a house. I don't know who they are, but the owner of the house is two adult men, who forcibly brought a small woman with them. What James wanted was to get to the last party the human race had as quickly as possible. Therefore James did not want to interfere with what he had seen, but the frightened screams of the little girl's child made James uneasy. Until finally James determined his intention to help the little girl. James entered the house, but unfortunately, James faced two people who owned the house, and then James was forced to kill them. The little girl's name was Rose. Rose was separated from her father until she was kidnapped by two adult men whom James had killed. James also invites Rose to come with him because James doesn't want Rose to experience the same crime a second time. On the way, Rose begged James to take her to meet her father. Because of the remote location, James intends to leave Rose to his sister's house, of course with the hope that Rose is safe there. But when he arrived, James didn't see his sister and his sister's family at all. The house is so quiet, as if uninhabited. Then, James slowly entered the house. Water poured from the top of the stairs as if to lead James to check it out. And it was true, his sister and sister's husband committed suicide right in the bathroom. Likewise, the children of his sister had been buried neatly behind the house. James was well aware of the fear that everyone felt. Some people think of dying quickly, rather than feeling the pain of burning asteroids before death. Finally, James decided to take Rose to the place where he was going, the last party of mankind. Because he doesn't think he has the heart to leave Rose alone, it's even more so that Rose's house is quite far away. James just didn't want to die conscious and in pain from the effects of the asteroids. Therefore the party maybe James wished for it. Despite the truth, James always remembered his girlfriend Zoe, whom James had left alone. On the way, James saw a police car parked in front of the shopping center. Maybe the best way at this point is to leave Rose to the cop, in the hope that the cop can take Rose to her father. But upon entering, James saw the policeman taking his wife and children with him, and wanted to kill them. However, the policeman's love for his family was too great. So the policeman asked James to kill him and his family while they were having fun. James understood the feelings of the police, but he preferred to refuse and leave them. In short, James made it to where the party was. It was crazy there. Drunk people, casual sex, they do whatever they want to do. Rules are no longer used because the question is, who needs rules before their death? On the other hand, James' friends had already prepared a cellar, which was already full of food, but actually, they knew this wouldn't save them from the asteroid's effects. There would be no way for anyone to survive because the effects of an asteroid thousands of kilometers away would burn everything down. But at least, that's what they can do to keep themselves cool. James suddenly seemed to dislike whatever was happening at the party. He knew now he had to take Rose to her family. Because if it wasn't for him, then Rose would never be able to meet her family. Finally, James left the last party of mankind with Rose, but when he got out, the car wasn't there. Finally, James decided to walk. The weather is getting hotter, the sun is like there are two, and it burns their skin. Then on the road, James stole a taxi from the owner. Now things are getting crazy. James decided to go to a house, where the house turned out to be his mother's house. James hadn't visited his mother in a long time. This was James' first time chatting with his mother in years. A dark past makes him and his mother no longer visit each other. They never communicate with each other again. But it felt like now only affection was left, and each of them was now finally willing to forgive the other. Now is the perfect time to come to terms with it. James went to his mother's house not only to meet his mother for the last time, but also to make vehicle fuel, where the journey to the Rose family feels quite far from where he is. Finally, James left his mother alone. That was probably the last time James saw his mother. Today many people say goodbye to each other. I don't think it would have occurred to me if I had experienced this. On the way, there was the voice of a radio announcer who was probably the only active announcer. It was inconceivable that this world would end. There is no life left in this world. You could say the earth will be like an orange, with a burning fire as the peel. They finally got to Rose's grandmother's house, because Rose said the purpose of her father and herself were to gather here. The house was quiet, as if there was no sign of life in it. James then went behind the house. There he saw corpses lying irregularly. They were all Rose's family who chose to die sooner rather than feel the pain of being burned. It turned out that Rose's father's body was also there, carrying a family photo in his shirt pocket. James restrained Rose, who was about to come behind the house, because who would be able to see their family die right in front of them? James only said that Rose's father had died along with the rest of Rose's family. Rose cried about it and still wanted to go see her father. But James told Rose to sit down. With a white cloth, James wrapped Rose's father's body and gave it to Rose. Sadness was evident from Rose's tears. The feeling of loss and disbelief seemed to mix in Rose's heart. Maybe you've felt it too. So sick more than anything. James asked Rose to go with him. It seemed impossible for him to leave Rose alone there. But Rose decided to stay there with her father until the end. Until where the fire caused by the asteroid came and burned her body. Rose placed flowers on her father's corpse because at least that's what he can do now. Then James gave Rose the photo he found earlier in Rose's dad's shirt pocket. That was the last time James saw Rose before they finally met again in heaven. But now James knew he had to go to Zoe. At this moment James also didn't understand why he was so in love with Zoe. On the road, the situation is very quiet because there are no people in any life, no one selling anything, let alone playing bicycles. Then James' car caught fire. Maybe because the weather is so hot it makes any object immediately overheat and eventually catch fire. James decided to run. He forced his feet to keep going because he knew he had to be with Zoe. Finally, James arrived at Zoe's place. There Zoe was not in her room, but Zoe was daydreaming on the beach lamenting her life. Somehow it felt like a very big love that James felt for Zoe. But it was too late. A gigantic wave of fire will soon engulf them into true life. They embraced, forgave each other, and finally died, swallowed by the fierce waves of giant fire. And the film ends. Okay everyone, enough of this video. See you again in the next EQ movie recapped video.